So after an amazing run, Voigtlander finally make a rubbish lens. Let's take a closer look. So today we're looking at the Voigtlander Heliar Classic 50mm f1.5 VM lens, released September 2021. Hello and welcome, Matt here from MrLeica.com. Happy holidays to all of you. So this is my second of 3 videos from when I was in Poland, and it is also my 36th Leica Mount lens review. From the 1st of January 2022, I'll be doing monthly giveaways, so feel free to subscribe to have a chance of winning. Okay, let's take a closer look at this lens. As I said in the title, this is Voigtlander's potentially first rubbish lens, but the Voigtlander engineers designed it in this way. This lens is designed to be imperfect, or aka rubbish, in a world full of perfect lenses. So taking a closer look at the 50mm Heliar, if you buy this lens you get a metal hood included, which is good because many of the other Voigtlander lenses don't include a lens hood. You get a plastic lens cap and a metal lens cap. This lens is only available in one colour, and that is the black and silver lens I'm showing you here. This is another all metal and glass lens from Voigtlander, super smooth and rangefinder coupled for any Leica Mount lenses. It has a minimum close focus distance of 0.5 meters, and then it will be rangefinder coupled from 0.7 meters through to infinity. It gives you a maximum aperture of f1.5 through to f16 with half stop aperture clicks. And this lens has no focus tab. In terms of the optics, it is a 6 element in 3 group design with 10 aperture blades. This lens is single coated, like some of the other Voigtlander lenses where they're marked SC for single coated, something like the Voigtlander Nokton 51.5. In terms of weight, it is 255 grams or 9 ounces. That makes it middle of the range. It is heavier than the Nokton 51.5, but it is lighter than the Nokton 51.2. In terms of physical size, it is also larger than the Nokton 1.5 and again smaller than the Nokton 1.2. To test the character of this lens, I took this lens to Poland and I shot it on a APS-C mirrorless Leica CL camera and a full frame mirrorless Leica SL camera. If we first look at some colour images, this lens being single coated gives you a perhaps softer palette with slightly lower saturation and perhaps less of a modern look, which is what you'd expect from a single coated lens. Single coated also means that the contrast is lower than a multi-coated lens, so that helps to give perhaps a more vintage look, and it's often popular to use single coated lenses for say black and white photography. In terms of lens flare, I didn't see any sunshine in Poland sadly, so I wasn't able to do any kind of creative flare shots. I did test this lens briefly before taking it to Poland, and it does flare like a crazy thing. Because of the single coating, you can get some really interesting flare patterns. In terms of sun stars, I got sun stars at f4, 5.6, f8, f11, and then by 16 it was more of a spray. And then what about bokeh? Because we had no sunshine to test the bokeh, I tried to shoot this lens at night. Luckily, because I had this lens to test in December, the Christmas lights were out in Gdansk in Poland. So these are some example photos trying to test the lens at different distances to test the bokeh. If you get really close at 1.5 meters, you can get some really interesting bokeh. And as you can see here, the bokeh towards the edges of the frame gets a bit more interesting in terms of different sizes. The bokeh or the bokeh from this lens may not be for everybody. It does have a distinct look with perhaps you might call it the onion ring style bokeh with the highlighted edges. The closest I can think of to a similar bokeh are images shot with the Voigtlander Nokton 35 1.4 Classic and the Voigtlander Nokton 40mm f1.4 Classic. I wanted to do my usual bokeh test, so here's me shooting the same street lights at 1.5, at f2, at f2.8, f4 and f5.6. The bokeh balls are only around f1.5, and then after that you'll see the aperture blades. Now what about sharpness? This is probably an unfair test, testing a lens designed to be imperfect at sharpness. So here's me first testing the lens at infinity. So shooting at again 1.5, f2, f2.8, f4 and f5.6. Now there is some good news. If you shoot the lens wide open at 1.5, it's going to be very soft, as you can probably see in some of these sample photos. Stopping the lens down to f2, it does improve the sharpness. Once you stop down to f2.8, the center sharpness does start to get reasonably good, and by f4 the sharpness is at least good enough or more than good. If you like your corner sharpness, stop the lens down to f5.6 and you should have a reasonable degree of sharpness from corner to corner and a much more corrected look than if you shoot the lens wide open. Now, as a portrait photographer, I wanted to see how this lens performs close up. So first I tested this lens in the studio and I shot it against a Jupiter 8 cheap Soviet lens and also a Voigtlander Nokton 51.5 screw mount version. After doing this test, I realised I was missing the point with this lens. What is the point of testing this lens for perfection when it is designed to be imperfect? For that reason, I waited for a break in the rain and I headed into the garden, and now here's me testing the lens first on its own. So I shot the lens at f1.5, f2, f2.8, f4 and f5.6, and you can see the change in the bokeh structure and also the sharpness increase in the centre of the frame. All of these photos are shot with the Leica SL on a tripod pointed at my Zorky 4. Next, I wanted to compare the Jupiter 8 50mm f2 and also the the Voigtlander Nokton 50 f1.4 Leica screw mount lens, the spherical version. Nokton 51.5 old lens is a great performer, but it's kind of half the price of a modern Voigtlander lens, and I included the Jupiter 8 because it's a cheap vintage lens, and I'll come on to that in a second. The Jupiter 8 being a sonar lens design will give you interesting bokeh. The Nokton absolutely blows the pants off the Heliar. At f2, the old Nokton 1.5, if you want to see more of that versus the new Nokton, see the Nokton 1.5 video that I did. Before we go on, what about the price of this lens? The Voigtlander Heliar 51.5 costs £629 if you buy it in the UK. And then if you buy from robertwhite.co.uk, you'll get 5% discount using the Mr. Leica code. If you're based in the US, the lens costs £849. I couldn't find it currently listed on Amazon at the time of making this video, but I will include a link for when it becomes available. And so the moment of truth, can I recommend the Voigtlander Heliar 51.5? No. This is the first time I'm not recommending a Voigtlander lens that I've tested. So the good news is, I'm now not a yes man. I do actually have no in my vocabulary. If we break this down into perhaps 2 pros, 2 cons. The first pro of this lens is this lens will focus to 0.5 meters. That's closer than the Nokton 51.2 and the Nokton 51.5, meaning if you want a shallow depth of field, by being able to get closer, you can get a greater shallow depth of field. That might be your thing. The way around that is if you shoot with a Leica SL camera, such as myself, you just use a close focus adapter from 7 Artisans, and then you can shoot any lens as close as you'd like. And the second benefit of this lens is trying to be an old lens, but it's brand new. So you don't get all the problems of buying an old lens on eBay. Haze, fungus, scratches, dodgy eBay sellers, all things like that. Now, in terms of cons, the reason I don't recommend this lens is, number one, you're paying top dollar to have an imperfect lens, and that just doesn't kind of comprehend with my brain. I don't mind spending money on a high performing lens, but I wouldn't spend high money on a bad performing lens. So my recommendation would be buy one good 50mm lens. So it could be the Nokton 51.5, it could be the Nokton 51.2, it could be the 50 f2 Apo, it could be like a Similux 51.4. There's lots of amazing 50mm lenses. Spend your money on a good lens and then just find yourself a cheap vintage lens on eBay. As I say, you could get something like the Jupiter 8. Those lenses cost around $50 or £50, and you're going to get interesting imperfect photos. So if all you want is interesting imperfect photos, I don't see the point of buying a brand new lens. Just buy a vintage lens and save a huge amount of money. As you may know, I really enjoy my film photography, and I did have this lens with me in Poland, as well as a Leica M4P. I did deem the lens too bad or too soft to bother shooting on film, as I didn't want to waste any film. Finally, let's look at some more sample photos. First, we have photos shot on the APS-C crop sensor Leica CL camera. Here's a behind the scenes clip from me shooting with one of the models in Poland that you can see on Patreon. Using this lens on the Leica CL means you're going to miss all the juicy bits from the edges, because crop sensor cameras only use the center of the frame. For that reason, I tried to use the lens mostly on the Leica SL full frame camera. So all of these photos are shot with the Leica SL, and all images are just edited with my Mr. Leica SL black and white preset. These presets that I use are available to download at my mrleica.com blog. On the Leica SL especially, I found the images too soft for my taste at f1.5, and I did almost feel like I was missing some shots in terms of making non-keepers versus keepers, purely because it was too soft for my taste. Obviously, it's a matter of taste. So for that reason, I started shooting the lens at f2, f2.8, and even at f4 for some photos. You can see this photo with the lights here. This is shot at probably f2.8 to f4, and you can see really nice sharpness on the eyes, and that is completely different to if you shoot the lens wide open at 1.5. I think although dreamy lenses are supposed to be nice for portraits, for me it's a balance between capturing enough detail so you don't have a blurred photo and having something aesthetically pleasing. And so to summarize, while we're looking at these pictures, I think Voigtlander achieved exactly what they set out to achieve: an imperfect lens in a perfect world. If you're struggling with your digital camera and you're really struggling to get kind of any interest in terms of rendering from your kit lens or whatever modern lens you're using, this lens really will inject some interest into your photos. But for me personally, I think buying a vintage lens will do a similar thing on a lower budget. So in conclusion, is this a bad lens? No, not at all. It does exactly what it says on the tin. If you're using super controlled, absolutely perfect lenses, such as perhaps say the Apo lenses, and you want something with a bit more interest, and this is definitely a character lens. If you shoot the lens wide open, you'll get obviously more character. But then if you stop the lens down to f4, f5.6, you will get sharp enough usable photos. So it can give you kind of 2-in-1. And for anybody not wanting to mess around with vintage lenses, this can be a great option for adding a bit of interest to your sensor. And with that said, a massive thank you to Flaghead Photographic for sending me this lens to test. If you enjoy these types of lens reviews, please do smash the like button, and then hopefully we'll get more lenses to test to share with you in 2022. And with that said, don't forget to subscribe. The first giveaway will be starting in around a week's time, so look out for that. I'll be announcing the winner at the end of that video. As always, a massive thanks to my patrons, and see you in the next video.